We're holding chapter 4 in Ve'isha Achas. We just read, as you just mentioned, we just read the Haftarah this past Shabbos. This story, Ve'isha Achas, was read, the Haftarah for Parshas Vayera. But the Maimer we're learning is a Maimer for Chav Cheshvan, the 20th of Cheshvan, which is the birthday of the Rebbe Rashab. And now we're actually going to turn our attention to a Maimer of the Rebbe Rashab. So up to this point, we brought two discourses of the Alter Rebbe on this story of the widow who comes to Elisha. We explained how it represents the soul and the soul crying to God and a conversation between the soul and God and what God tells the soul. Now, without going back into recapping the whole story, which we've reviewed a few times, the focus kind of veers to something else. But we explained at depth, at length, the two different interpretations of the Alter Rebbe on Atu B'nayich Tichi B'noisar, Kelim Reikim Al Tamiti, and Atu B'nayich Tichi B'noisar. That God tells the soul to go out and get as many empty vessels as possible, and to fill them with oil, and that then go out and sell that oil. And At Ubanayich, you, meaning the soul, Ubanayich, and your children, which, as we said, are love and fear, will live off of the noisar, off of the extra. So we discussed the two different interpretations, whether Kelim Reikim Al Tamiti, the empty vessels, whether it refers to studying Torah and performing mitzvahs without emotion, without that feeling, or whether it refers to reflecting on how you are an empty vessel, that you are distant from God. And we discussed that depending on which interpretation, the interest that comes as a result is different. So there's the light that shines in the darkness. We're talking about a very powerful light that comes from studying Torah and doing mitzvahs in an empty way. And then there's an even greater light, which is not actually light, it's the darkness itself. That's the Yisrei Na'or Min HaCheshech, is that you reach a higher level within darkness, the level that's too great to even be considered light. And we said that this is basically makif. So let's just try and make some sense of this before we move on to chapter 4. So we said that in general, in Chassidus, it discusses the idea of makif and pnimi. Makif is transcendence, and pnimi is immanence. These are two different ways that God relates to the world, and within man, the way different levels in which we operate. So God wants to create a world. As He is beyond creation, as He is before creation, where there is nothing other than God. So there's only the infinite light of God. There's nothing else. Once God decides to create a world, the world is, by definition, finite. It has borders. Creation is something that has a definition. If it has a beginning, it has parameters. And so in order to create a finite world, God has to limit, as it were, that infinite light and have that go into the world. So God desires that we should come to know Him in the world. He doesn't just want to create a world that is totally disconnected from its creator. He wants His creation to come to know Him. So He creates the world in a certain way which is in a way that He is going to be knowable in creation. And one of the ways of doing that is creating the world in a mirror image, as it were, of Himself. So everything that you have in heaven, everything you have above within God, you have also played out within the created universe. So when God comes to create the world, so the Creator creates. So He invests energy into His creation. So He creates a finite world, and that finite world is invested with divine energy. Each level gets the energy that it needs to be whatever it is. But God as Creator is really beyond creation. And so there's a part of God, as it were, that is not at all involved or invested in creation. So these two parts, God as He is a creator and invested in creation, that is pnimi, that's immanence, the immanent light of God, the one that's present in creation, the one that animates all of creation. And then there's the transcendent, there's the makif, the one that is removed. Now within makif itself, within transcendence, we discussed that there are two levels. There's makif hakarev and makif harachik. A distant makif, a distant transcendent level, and a close transcendent level. What does that mean? When God decides He wants to create a world, so there still is no creation. Everything is still infinite. Everything is still transcendent. But in that space of awareness, however we want to explain it, within God, already He's starting to sort of pull Himself towards creation. So that's a makif hakariv. That's a makif that's already connected with what's going to follow. It's already a source for what is going to follow. So there's a part of God as creator, as he's transcendent, as he's beyond creation, that is already connected to creation. That's a makif hakariv. And that represents the level we'll get actually to levels in a moment. Then you have the makif harachik, which is the part of God that's totally not at all in creation, not interested in being in creating, and not at all even a source for creation. That's the distant makif. These two levels of makif hakariv and makif harachik are the levels. These two aspects of transcendence correspond to the world of Keser, to the level of Keser. So we know that there are 10 attributes, beginning with Chachma, going all the way down to Malchus. Those 10 attributes are the body, as it were, of creation. God chooses to be known in his creation, and so he creates with these attributes. So there's wisdom, and there's kindness, and there's humility, and there's all these different attributes through which God creates the world. Every attribute has a different function, and creates a different part, and these are knowable traits, as it were. They're finite. Something that's kind is kind, it's not judgmental. Something that's compassion is compassion, it's not kindness. They're different, so they're already defined. Being that they're defined, that means that they're pnimi, they're immanence. Keser, the crown, a crown sits above the head. So if your intellect is in the head, so in the Godhead, we call it the Chabad, the first 3 levels of the 10 attributes represent the head. The crown sits above the head. So where's the crown? Is the crown part of it or not? Where do you draw the line between creator and creation? Is it before Keser, after Keser? So in the Arizal and Chassidus discusses at length this idea that Keser could be divided in 2. There's Atik and Arich. Atik is the higher level of Keser. Atik means that it's cut off, it's removed, it's distant. That's the deeper part of Keser. That's totally removed from creation. That corresponds to Makif. Hey, welcome back. That corresponds to the Makif Harachik, to the distant transcendent level. And then you have Arich. Arich is already the lower level in Keser. That's the part that becomes a source for what comes afterwards. That's the Makif Hakariv. Okay, does that make sense? Now, within man, because we said God wants to be known, so he creates us in the same way. Within man, we also have these two functions of immanence and transcendence. Immanence means all the powers that we have, all our talents and abilities that are invested, that are internalized. So, for instance, and where does that start? It starts with our intellect. Our intellect, the seat of our intellect is in our mind. The seat of your emotions are in the heart. The seat of your action is in your hands. Every faculty, every function that we have, your capacity to see is in the eye. Your capacity to speak is every function that we have has a specific part of our body, right? A specific limb that it's attached to, that it's invested in. So those are the koiches pnimim, the immanent internal powers or abilities. What's the transcendent part of us? So that's our will and pleasure, but we're going to leave pleasure out. Will. Our will, that's why will, this is when they say, when there's a will, there's a way. Why? Because your will is more powerful than everything. Where's the seat of your will? Where do you want? So if it's a real desire, you can't pinpoint where you want it. You feel it everywhere. When you're thinking a thought, where are you thinking your thought? In your mind. When you're doing an action, where's the act happening? Yes, obviously the mind has to be engaged in everything that's happening, but there's a specific part of you that can identify that's engaged in this act. But when you want something truly and deeply, where do you want it? Your mind, your heart, you feel it everywhere. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. No, what happens is our will ultimately comes in. I don't want to get sidetracked about the conversation of will, that our will most of the time is not even real will, because it doesn't start from our inside ourselves, it starts from outside. But that's another conversation. We're talking about will as it is pure, unadulterated will. But will, it originates beyond. There's a will that's internal, that comes from beyond anything that's outside of you.
That is pnimi, right?
No, so will is makif. Because you feel it everywhere. Just like your life force, you have the life force that animates the parts of your body specifically, but then there's the life force that's transcendent, which is everywhere in your body equally. A living person, that life is seen equally in the body, everywhere. There's not one place that it's seen more than any other. So that's a transcendent nature. Now, the truth is, what you're saying is accurate. Maybe we'll touch on it later on. Really, our transcendence isn't real transcendence. Our makif isn't real makif, because we're not infinite. So everything we have is really somewhat invested and somewhat limited. So okay, it's a good observation. It's a good point. But we're trying to contrast one from the other, right? So if you want to contrast Ratzin from the Koiches Pnimi, that's Makif and that's Pnimi. Okay, so that's a little introduction that will help us understand what we're about to get into in chapter 4. But before we get into this next subject matter, we have to just finish off something from before. And that is that we said, we said that we're going to access the essence of the soul, and that will lead to either performing mitzvahs without love and fear, or thinking about how distant we are from God. And what will happen as a result? You and your children, the soul and its children, and its love and fear of God, its emotions, will live off that interest, meaning the Yisra and that additional light that comes from the darkness. And we explained the distinction, and we explained that at length in the past. We're not going to recap that. But that begs the question, if we're talking about transcendence, that Yisra Na'or, that additional light, that transcendence that stems from the essence of the soul, that's a transcendent aspect of the soul, how is it that Atu Vanayich, how does that affect Banayich, your children, the love and fear? Love and fear are internal. Those are imminent functions. How does the Makif mingle with the Pnimi? How does the transcendent mix with the imminent? How does one impact the other? Or be internalized? If it's transcendent, then it can't be internalized, right? So how does that then? How does that dynamic work? Let's see the question, and then we're going to move on to. Before we get back to explaining it, we'll move on to our broader conversation. Okay, Dalit. We have to understand what the pasuk says, that you and your children will live off of the extra that also your love and fear of the soul, which as we said is referred to as banayich, your children will also live off of this extra. Because mikivan shenoiser hu makif, since as we explained in the past and earlier, that noiser, this extra, is makif, is a very high transcendent level. Befrat la pirush noiser makif harachik, especially as we explained that noiser, we explained noiser could be the makif hakarev or it could be the makif harachik, especially if we're considering noiser to be makif harachik, meaning that it's really far removed, completely disconnected from the imminent aspect that follows. So eich shayich sheyumshach. How is it possible that from that makif harachik, that should inform, that should affect and influence the koiches hapnimim, the internal faculties of love and fear? Okay, so that's the question that sort of sums up everything we've learned till now from the Mamarim of the Alter Rebbe. Okay, so now as we said, this is a maimer from Chav Cheshvan, a maimer of that marks the birthday of the Rebbe Rashab. And so now the Rebbe is going to, we're going to explain it by introducing a maimer from the Rebbe Rashab, who is the Baal Yom HaYoledes. Okay, so we can explain this concept based on something that was written by the Rebbe Rashab in his maimer, whose birthday is this week, the 20th of Cheshvan. In his maimer that entitled Ki HaMitzvah Zayis Asher Noich Mitzav Chayim Lein Fleisim Chavalei Rechaika, there's a maimer that he has that's titled that Ki HaMitzvah is, the pasuk says in right at the end, towards the end of Chumash Dvarim, in Moshe's last address to the Jewish people. So he says, Ki HaMitzvah is this mitzvah, Asher Anoichi Mitzav Chayim, which I will command you today. Lo niflesi mimcha, it's not removed from you. V'lo rechaikahi, it's not distant from you. Right, and then the verse continues. We all know there's a famous song to these words. It's not across the sea that you have to say who's going to go across the street. It's not in the sea. It's not in heaven. You say who's going to go up to heaven and get it for us. And then that the whole thought concludes with Kikare veilecha hadavar ma'od beficha v'vavcha asleisay, a very famous pasuk, right? That it's very near to you in your mind and your heart to do. Okay, so the maimer with the titles from this verse in the B'Sefer Amarim Shloshim Mechir that's going to be printed. This maimer that the Rebbe is quoting was not printed at the time the Rebbe said the maimer. It was a maimer that was being prepared for print at the time in 1986. Or this is really 1985. So the Rebbe Rashab explains that these two expressions, the pasuk says it's not nifleis from you and it's not rechaika. It's not removed from you and it's not distant from you. Why this extra verbiage? Why the double terminology? Because they represent two different levels. Nifleis and rechaika are atik and arich. Atik and arich are two levels that we talked about in Keser. The Pella, which we translated as removed, but Pella kind of also means wondrous. it's totally a wonder, something that's totally beyond, it's totally removed from your comprehension. And Pelashu Lashon Afrash of Avdallah, which as we translated, it's a term of separation and being removed. Hu ba'atik, that's an atik, the higher level of keser, the makif ha-rachik, the distant makif. Shenetak v'nivdal me'ishtalshus, which is cut off and removed from hishtalshus, from the order of creation. V'richuk, distance hu ba'arich, that's in the lower level of keser, arich, the Lashon richuk meirish yesh le'shayches ladavar shu rachik mimenu. Distance implies that there's a connection between the two things, the things that are distant from each other. So you can't, if you say I'm far away, you're far away from something, that implies that there's a connection. There's a distance, so okay, you're distant from it, but distance implies that there's a space that connects you. It's just a very large space. Shlomo Melech says, I sought wisdom, I sought to be wise, it's distant from me. Why did he say I wanted to be wise? If he can't be wise, why would he seek wisdom? It's because obviously he has the capacity for wisdom. It's just that it's distant from him. So we see, just as the verse states, Shlomo says, I sought wisdom and it's distant from me. What does it mean that it's distant from me? Distant from me means that I have the capacity for wisdom, and Shlomo was the wisest of all men, and ultimately he came to realize that it's distant. But still, there's a connection. So he explains over there, the Rebbe Rashab explains in his Maimer, the Mashkosuk mitzvah zayis gleimer lo nifleisi mimcha gomer. Mimcha dafke hu ki kivan sha mitzvahs heim rotzin elyon rotzin shalamayl mitame bebchinas pelav. So he says, what is the verse telling us? That this mitzvah, which I am commanding you today, and we'll explain in a moment what that means, is not distant from you and not removed from you. Not removed from you, not distant from you. Why is that? Because really, mitzvahs are distant and removed from us. So the verse, Moshe Rabbeinu is telling us a chiddush, he's giving us a novelty. You would think that it's distant from you. Why? Because it really is distant and removed. And so now I'm coming to tell you a chiddush, something new. It's not distant, it's not removed from you. Why is it that mitzvahs, the commandments why are they removed and distant from you? Because mitzvahs are God's will. And will, as we just explained before, desire or will is beyond intellect. It's higher, it's the highest capacity. That's a transcendent level. So you, as you are in your wisdom, in your understanding, your knowledge as a limited, finite individual, have no connection with the transcendent.
They're distant from you that you can't understand them.
They're distant from you, meaning there's no connection between you and them. It's not just that you can't, it's not about whether you can understand them or not. They're totally beyond your reality.
But we do them.
So even doing them should be distant from you. The interaction, we shouldn't be able to have any kind of connection to mitzvahs in the performance and the understanding in any of it. It's totally removed from us. They're transcendent.
Because it's Ratzon.
Because Ratzon is l'mayla mitam. Ratzon, will, is higher than reason, and therefore, since it's transcendent, so therefore they're in this level of pela v'richuk. So that's when we're talking about mitzvahs in general. We'll get back to mitzvahs in general, but especially the Rebbe says like this: mitzvahs hatshuva, especially mitzvahs hatshuva. That mitzvah says koyam mitzvahs hatshuva k'mesh kasav Ramban mekam mefarshim sheila ma'ila ma'aratz in the mitzvahs. Especially if you consider that. So it says the pasuk says ki mitzvah hazois. This mitzvah which I am commanding you today is not removed and it's not distant. What's this mitzvah? So there are a few interpretations. So the Ramban and others, the Kli Yakar brings it, and I think the Sefarnoi. And other commentaries say that what's mitzvah is this mitzvah. This mitzvah is referring to tshuva, the mitzvah of tshuva. So we're not talking about all the mitzvahs. We're talking about specifically the mitzvah of tshuva. That tshuva is not distant. So if you're talking about the mitzvah of tshuva, especially the way the Ramban explains it, shehilamayla me'eratz in the mitzvahs, tshuva is higher than mitzvahs. Why is tshuva higher than mitzvahs? Because tshuva has the capacity to undo all the wrongs that you did. So if you commit a sin or you don't perform a mitzvah, tshuva can undo that. How does tshuva undo that? Because tshuva is higher than them. So it's explained, we'll read inside in a moment, that every mitzvah that we do is connected. Again, we still have to understand how we connect, but we know, let's work from the end, from the bottom line, that every mitzvah we do, it reaches into the Ratzon Elyon. A mitzvah is God's will, and therefore when we do a mitzvah, we're accessing God's will. So there's will. But then there's the one who has the will. So there's my will, and then there's me that wills, that desires, right? So there's the Ratzin, and then there's the Baal HaRatzin. There's Ratzin, there's will, and then there's the Baal HaRatzin, the one who has the desire. Tshuva, it's explained, reaches Baal HaRatzin. That goes into the one who desires, meaning that it reaches higher than his desire. So there's God, and there's his will, and when we don't fulfill his will, how do we get around that? How do we seek atonement? How do we do tshuva? Because tshuva reaches into God that's higher than his will itself. So we can access a level that's even higher than the will, and therefore that could help us undo and right any wrongs. This is explained in many places. The fact that tshuva has the ability to fix any blemishes, because tshuva reaches in the Ein Sof, in the infinite light of the Baal HaRatzin, the one who desires, which is Shalamayla Meratz in the mitzvahs. That's higher than his actual desire for mitzvahs. To the extent that not only is it reaching Baal HaRatzin, but it reaches even higher than Baal HaRatzin is still connected to Ratzin. There's God as he wills, and then there's God as his essence, which you can't put any definition on whatsoever, so it reaches even to his essence. This is then why it says, when for interpreting the mitzvah hazais to mean tshuva, it says, Asher anoichi mitzavcha hayom. I, anoichi, am commanding you. Who's anoichi? So we know anoichi, misha anoichi is a reference to Atzmus, to God's essence. So if we're talking about the mitzvah of tshuva is not just something that is in God's will, which is transcendent, and it itself should be pela v'richuk, but especially if we're talking about tshuva is even higher. Tshuva is even beyond Ratzin, that's in the Baal HaRatzin, until it reaches even into Atzmus. So certainly tshuva should be totally removed and distant from us. The tshuva, and now the Rebbe explains the two levels of tshuva. The tshuva tata, he b'bchinas richuk, tshuva ilah, he b'bchinas pela. Why, if we're talking about tshuva, so why again the two terms of pela and richuk? Because there are two levels of tshuva. There's the lower tshuva tata, and there's the higher tshuva ilah. Tshuva tata would mean richuk, distant, implying some kind of a connection, and tshuva ilah, that's totally beyond. That's pela. That's totally removed. Why is it like that? Tshuva tata he b'chinas makif d'chaya, makif hakarev. V'gam ha'amshachim l'mayla nimshach zayde tshuva tata he makif d'eryasha sheyesh l'shayich zapnim d'b'chol so ha'arich. Tshuva ilah he makif d'yechida makif ha'rachaik. Okay, so he says, when we going back to our little introduction here, we were talking about the fact that everything is. God creates the world in a way that it should come to know him, so he creates everything in a similar way. He makes himself knowable in creation by having the 10 attributes, being known through his 10 attributes, but in order to know him, we have the same concept. We have the 10 faculties, the 10 functions, we have our ratzin, our will, so we have also these concepts of immanence and transcendence, and chesed and gvura, and all of these things. So like that, he becomes relatable to an extent. Similarly, we know that we have this idea of transcendence and immanence can be divided in the levels of the soul. So you have the soul has 5 levels. There's nefesh, ruach, neshama, naran. Lowest is nefesh, higher is ruach, higher is neshama. Those are the parts of the soul that are invested within the body. Those are the immanent aspects of the soul. Then you have chaya and yechida. Chaya and yechida are the 2 higher levels that are transcendent levels. Those remain up in heaven. They don't even invest and come into the body. They remain in heaven. They send down subliminal messages and subtle, subconscious or unconscious messages to the soul. We discussed a little bit in the Vatat Tzava. We talked a little bit about those aspects of the soul. So you have the transcendent levels of the soul, which are Chaya and Yechida, and then you have the immanent levels, Nefesh, Ruach, and Neshama, those are immanent. Those are the Koiches Pnimim. So just as we have a Makif HaKarev and a Makif HaRachaik, you have Atik and Arich. So the same is true with the soul. You have the distant transcendent level, which is the Yechida, which is totally one with God, and that was what we're saying. That's Pele. That's totally removed. It has Yechida, it's oneness with God. And then you have Chaya, the level of transcendence that is like Arich, that's like the Makif HaKarev. That's a Makif, it's distant, that's what we call Mazel, right? So there's a connection. The Mazel is what impacts us. So that's a transcendent level that's beyond us, but still connected, that's distant. So Tshuva Tata is something that's done with the level of Chaya, and so therefore draws Makif HaKarev. Tshuva ilah, that's something that comes, that the higher level of tshuva, that's something that's a function of the highest level of the soul, the essence of the soul, the yechida, and so therefore, v'gam hamshacham el mayla shemshachas ha'idei zeh, he hamakif the ur chayzer shel mayla mishaychos lepnimius. So that's the level of Oichai. So there's Yashar, Oichai. Let's not, we're taking too much time here, so let's not get into Yashar, Oichai. But Yashar, the direct light, which is a lower level of light, the Oichai, the reflective, which represents a higher level, that's why it's reflective. So Yashar is drawn, you draw that direct light from above. That comes from Tshuva Tata, the lower level of Tshuva, which is Makif HaKarev, and that brings therefore a light of a Makif HaKarev, a lower level. Then you have Oy Chayzer, which comes as a result of Tshuva Ilah, that's the higher level of Makif, and that's the level that comes from Atik. So then what we say in the Pasuk, that it's not removed from you, and it's not distant from you, if we just explained that Tshuva is transcendent, if it's transcendent, it's removed, there's Makif HaKarev and Makif HaRachik, so what connection do we have to that? How do we access those things? How do we experience these things? So you can't. It's Pella and Richok, it's removed and it's far. So that's what Moshe Rabbeinu tells us in the Pasuk. Even though essentially it is removed and distant, but I'm telling you that it's not distant from you. Why not? Because what's the Pasuk say? It's not removed from you. What does that mean? Mimcha dafka, from you, min neshamas Yisrael, from the souls of Israel. The neshamas Yisrael yesh bahem hakoil. So the Rebbe Rashab concludes, what does it mean that it's why is it not removed from the neshamas Yisrael? Because the neshamas Yisrael yesh bahem hakoil, they have everything, they contain everything. The gam u'mayla noislim hakoil, and also from above they're given everything. And therefore it's not removed or distant from them, since the neshama has everything. And is also given everything, so therefore even these higher levels, which should really be distant and removed from it, are also granted to it, because the neshama has everything. So in other words, it sort of contains all these opposites and all these different contradictions. All of these levels can all be found within the soul. Because they can be found in the soul, so therefore we can access those levels. So essentially tshuva is removed and distant, but because we're talking about neshamas Yisrael, from Mimcha, from the neshamas Yisrael, from there, everything is possible. It's interesting. He says that the neshama has everything, and it's also given everything. I think that the two terms are related, and it's also a very important lesson for us. We have to know that we have the capacity, we have the ability to do whatever it is that God expects from us. Because we have that ability, therefore we're given every opportunity to do it, because you don't want to waste. You don't want to squander that ability that you have. It's about tashchis, to waste something that you have. So because you're capable of anything, so therefore you're given every opportunity to be able to achieve anything and everything in terms of our service of Hashem. Because otherwise it would be a total waste. So if we can have that ability, but we're never afforded an opportunity or to actually see it through, so then we'd be given extra abilities we don't need. The point is that it's Yesh Behem Hakol and the Gamul Maila Neislam Hakol. You have everything and you're granted everything from above. Because you have every ability, therefore God time and again affords us opportunities and gives us the blessings, He gives us the tools to be able to achieve and to utilize and maximize all of that potential. Okay. We have time to continue, chapter 5? Okay, so let's try and squeeze chapter 5 in. So we have to understand. So the Rebbe asks an interesting question here. We started by posing a question. We're saying that it's a chiddush that loy nifleisim, really tshuva is nifleis and rechaika. Really, it's removed and distant. But because the neshama has all these capacities, or the way we'd understand it up to this point, now to chapter 5, we would say the neshama itself has chaya and yechida. The neshama itself has a transcendent track that it operates on. So if it has a transcendent track, so then why shouldn't it be able to access transcendence? So if that's the case, what's really the chiddush? It's like an interesting question. So because we have Chai and Yechidus, Chai and Yechidus should be able to access Atik and Arich. What are you telling me? What's the novelty here? So if it's we have to understand we have to understand what is the chiddush, what is the novelty in the verse here that's telling us that it's not removed and distant. Since a person serves God also in a transcendent fashion, meaning with his chaya and his yechida, which are similar to the levels of transcendence above, the levels of Atik and Arich, as we explained before, what they are. So the Mawa Chiddush Kol Kach So if so, what's the great novelty that when we operate with our transcendent capacity of our soul, when we access our Chai and Yechida, that we should then be able to draw down from Atik and Arich. What's the novelty? The Rebbe says it's not a Chiddush kol kach. It is a Chiddush, but not such a Chiddush. Let's skip that little detail there. It's fine. The point is, what's the novelty here? It would seem that if you operate in transcendence, in a transcendent fashion, so you should be able to access that transcendent level from above as well. You know, let's not skip it. What's the point of a Chiddush kol kach? Why do you say it's not such a Chiddush? It is a Chiddush because our transcendence isn't real transcendence. We're not really infinite. We're finite. So we have something that's like infinite. Our transcendent levels are like they're infinite, but they're not actually infinite. So if that's the case, so you can't compare our infinite to the Eibusher's infinite. Our koiches apnimim, our internal immanent powers, you can compare it to the Eibusher's limited, as it were, powers. Even though even his immanent powers are infinite, but there's a similarity. This is chesed, that's chesed. There's more similarity. But here, when we're talking about our transcendent levels are not at all like the Eibusher's transcendent levels. It's just that we call them transcendent. So it's not such a, so it's a chiddush, but not such a chiddush. Okay. That suffices. Okay. So v'yesh leimar, so the Rebbe says we can explain the mimcha koyal naran shem ikar adam. That what's the chiddush of the pasuk? It's telling us that we can access the transcendent level of Atik and Arich. We can access it not only when we're operating in our chaya and yechida with our transcendent levels, the transcendent levels of our soul, but even when we're talking about the naran, the nefesh ruach neshama, the immanent part of the soul, which is ikar adam. You, me, who are we? We don't live our lives in chaya and yechida. We live our lives in this world, invested in this world as limited people with all kinds of problems and with limited perspective. That's where we live our lives. That's where our lives unfold. So that's the ikar ha'adam. That's who we are. So the chiddush of the pasuk the Rebbe is telling us is that we can that these higher transcendent levels from above are not distant from our limited selves, from the naran, from our immanent powers of our soul. That even though tshuva is in the transcendent part of the neshama, comes from that part of the soul, the essence of the soul that's transcendent. How does one go about trying to do tshuva? How do you start that process? So yeah, there are some people that just comes from above in a moment and they, okay. But if you're studying about tshuva, it comes the high holidays, you have to do tshuva. How do you start that process? Where does that process start? It doesn't start in your transcendent. It starts sitting down. Krishma Shalamita, it starts when you sit down and think about that you want to do tshuva. Where is that happening? Where is that occurring? In the naran, in your immanent space. His bananus, thinking, that's in your intellect, that's in your limited part of you. The point is that you think about it, you meditate on it, you contemplate, you reflect, and you come to that logical conclusion that it's time to do tshuva. So it's through that naran, through your finite abilities, that you're coming to start that process of tshuva. Because the So that's the chiddush of the Maimer, that we have the capacity to access our own transcendent part of our soul, our chai yechida, which are above, which don't come into us. We have the capacity to access it through our naran. That even though naran is immanent, chai yechida are transcendent, so there should be no connection, there should be no point of contact between them. But nevertheless, we have the ability through our work within ourselves, internally, to access those levels, to stir and to reach out to those levels of our neshama. And in turn, by doing that, what happens? We can then draw from the transcendence of above, from Atik and Arich. Why is it? How should we have that ability that our naran, our internal functions, should be able to access the transcendent? Why is it? As we brought from in the end of the previous chapter from the Maimer of the Rebbe Rashab, Ki Neshamas Yisrael, Hainu Gam HaNaran, the souls, meaning also the Naran. This is how the Rebbe explains it. The Neshamas Yisrael, you could learn in the Rebbe Rashab's Maimer that the Neshamas Yisrael, the souls of Israel, what does that mean? It means that the souls have a Naran level, they have a Chai Yechida level, but to Chai Yechida it's not distant. So the Rebbe says no. When he says that the Neshamas Yisrael, meaning also the Naran, also the immanent, finite, limited aspects of the soul, Yesh Lahem Akol, have everything, and also from above, they're given everything.